Okay, our sixth and final subcortical supratentorial structure is the hypothalamus and the pituitary system, which together work in an axis. We have our anterior pituitary and our posterior pituitary, and they're going to be communicating with the hypothalamus. Recall that the anterior pituitary makes its own hormones. The posterior pituitary is sort of gifted these hormones, oxytocin and ADH, from the hypothalamus. The hypothalamus communicates with the anterior pituitary via its own hormones: growth hormone releasing hormone, gonadotropin releasing hormone, prolactin releasing hormone, cortisol releasing hormone, and then thyroid releasing hormone to stimulate our flat peg hormones, FSH, LH, ACTH, TSH, prolactin, endorphins, and then growth hormone. Endorphins we can ignore. And then these are going to have all sorts of interesting downstream effects. And we're going to talk more about this in the endocrine system, so I wouldn't go too crazy with recalling all of this, but you guys should be roughly familiar with this via the MCAT. So the anterior pituitary is again connected via a portal system with the hypothalamus, while the posterior version has neurons, which basically deposit the hormones via vesicles across synapses. The anterior pituitary is derived from Rathke's pouch, which is ectoderm derived from oral tissue, while this is derived from neural tissue, ectoderm, specifically the diencephalon. So there's different embryological origins between the anterior pituitary and the posterior pituitary. And that seems kind of random and esoteric, and it is, but it's something that comes up occasionally, so I would know it. Connecting these two is what's called the infundibular stalk, which is much more elongated and thin than demonstrated in this picture. So actually, we're going to see a kind of an overview here. So starting with the thalamus, let's take a look. Okay. Under the thalamus, of course, under the thalamus, hypothalamus. The ventricle, the third one, is right in between the thalamus on the left and the right. Okay, here we have the long infundibular stalk that I mentioned, right under the optic chiasm. Let's get that away, and then right there we have our little pituitary gland, which is sitting in the sella turcica of the sphenoid bone, Turkish saddle. I don't really know what a Turkish saddle looks like, but apparently it looks like that. So this is our, we're really just putting emphasis here on the hypothalamus. And this is pretty much the same picture. Hypothalamus is kind of this master sensor, right? It has spies everywhere. It's picking up salt and pressure and acidity and temperature to try and regulate a homeostasis for the body. So paraventricular nucleus, I think of O and P being next to each other. So this is the one that makes oxytocin. Anterior nucleus is for cooling. I think of AC, anterior cooling. There's going to be a lot of contrast, opposites. So and the antithesis of this is then the posterior nucleus, which is going to deal, if the anterior is for cooling, this one is for heating. You can also think of hot pot. Preoptic nucleus. So preop is it's a term used to describe transgender, transsexual, or gender nonconforming people who have not completed gender reassignment surgery, but who desire to and are seeking that as an option. And if somebody is planning on getting surgery, they might be taking some sort of gonadotropin releasing hormone therapy, exogenous therapy, to supplement their transition. So I just remember the term pre-op goes with GnRH. So however you can make it stick. Supraoptic. So I think of supra, something being too high. Well, if your sodium's too high, then your body might go ahead and say, oh crap, we should release some ADH to raise the blood pressure and some vasopressin to dilute it to bring the levels down. So supra is sodium's too high, ADH would be released. The suprachiasmatic nucleus. So this, in response to light, is going to inhibit the pineal gland from secreting melatonin. The not depicted here, but the ventrolateral nucleus. I think lateral is you're reaching out with your extremities for food. So reaching out for food, that's going to be hunger. And the opposite of that then is medial, which is satiety. So things like leptin and ghrelin are going to be working here. As we mentioned, light is going to stimulate the SCN, suprachiasmatic nucleus, which is going to inhibit the pineal gland from secreting melatonin, which helps us sleep. Here is a picture of or depiction of the pineal gland here on the posterior side of the hypothalamus-thalamus structure. So as far as sleep goes, I would remember bats kind of drink blood. So when we're awake, we have beta waves. We're a little tired, we're meditating, we get alpha waves. Just started to fall asleep, you get theta waves. Stage 2, you're going to get the, bats, you get sleep spindles and K complexes here and here. Then delta wave, I think of D for deep. This is going to be your deep sleep, so stage 3 and stage 4. And sometimes this is referred to as slow wave sleep. And then REM is for rapid eye movements, because kind of interesting because your muscles are mostly paralyzed, but your eyes are fluttering quite severely. You can look this up on Google. It's kind of interesting. Or just observe your partner or buddy when they're sleeping weirdly. So this is paradoxical. And for whatever reason, I forget why I started this lecture a long time ago. They study ostriches. I guess they have like severe and easily observed changes in slow wave sleep versus REM sleep. But I just thought that was kind of random and hilarious. In REM sleep, as you can see, the pattern actually looks quite similar to being awake. Again, why it's paradoxical. So let's say I'm trying to unicycle and I want to learn how to unicycle. I want to make sure I get some REM sleep because that's going to help cement this understanding, this memory in my head. Let's say I got my first kiss today, or I have my wedding today, and I really want to remember this day. Well, emotional memory consolidation is going to be important too. During REM sleep, we said you lose motor tone. This is where dreaming occurs. This is where men might get erections, and elderly people are going to have less REM sleep. Looking at the deep sleep, slow wave sleep, delta waves. So if you want to remember something before your test, this is the declarative memory, the facts that your Anki cards is going to be consolidated here. So that's going to be particularly important. And some people just consolidate this to stage 3 and don't differentiate it. Bedwetting will occur here. Now, this is the deepest sleep, hardest to arouse somebody, and also down in the elderly. And see that this kind of we're here. Maybe like hour and a half, we're going to get these little REM cycles. And you skip past, so this y-axis here is kind of showing how deep the sleep is. So you actually skip past REM sleep here the first time, but then we just kind of go through these nice cycles. So we go down, 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 up, 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 REM. Sometimes you awake briefly, just for whatever reason, you're not even aware of it, you don't remember, or maybe you got to go pee. But again, like every hour and a half. So if you want to set your alarm 7.5 hours or 9 hours apart, would be ideal so that you hit just the end of a sleep cycle. So brain's crazy important, right? It's like 2% of our body mass. It's 25% of our energy demands. There's not a lot of glycogen in the brain, so it's really prone to ischemia and needs a lot of food. It's also vulnerable for a bunch of reasons, though. It's really, really soft tissue. So it's really, really important that the body takes steps to protect it. It does this with the blood-brain barrier, which, some things like glucose and amino acids will be you typically allowed in, although they're regulated, but a lot of other things are outright banned as opposed to normal systemic circulation. And this tight blood-brain barrier is achieved through tight junctions of astrocyte foot processes in a thickened and tougher basement membrane, just to keep it from harm. But so this isolation is a double-edged sword, right? So if you're extra protected from bad things in the body, well, that also means you might be protected from information that we might have in our blood. It also means it might be difficult to get information out into the blood if we need to. So there's a trade-off here. So to circumvent this, we have a couple of circumventricular organs. So normally, again, we can't get through because we get these tight junctions and these foot processes, etc. But we have these sometimes fenestrated capillaries where things are allowed through circumventricular because they are near certain ventricles in the body. And this allows, chemicals, whether good or bad, maybe to have a little bit of access to brain tissue. So some of these we've already talked about. So the pituitary gland we've talked about, and this makes sense. We got to secrete hormones to the blood. Pineal gland, we need to put melatonin into the blood, help us sleep. A couple that we haven't talked about, though. So in the hypothalamus, the OVLT has osmoreceptors for sodium. And again, we said if sodium's too high, supra is going to release ADH. But then we also have the SFO. So this is in the third ventricle. This is in the interventricular foramen, also known as the foramen of Monroe. This is going to have baroreceptors, also going to be for ADH released from the supraoptic nucleus. The median eminence, we said that the hypothalamus needs to communicate with the pituitary, and this is how it does, gonadotropin releasing hormone from the preoptic, the TRH, CRF, etc. Then in the medulla, we have the area postrema. This is going to detect toxic chemicals in the blood. And it's going to help regulate and inform the vomiting center. So the area postrema, I would just think it is the chemoreceptor trigger zone, the CTZ. Some people say the AP is in the CTZ. Some people say the CTZ is in the AP. I don't think it really matters. I think the AP is more of a geographical term. That was first that was the first coined. They just knew the geography yet, and then later they figured out what it was, and they said it was the CTZ. But the Venn diagram between AP and CTZ, in my opinion, is like a circle. So I would just think of them as pretty much the same thing. And then the choroid plexus, technically, you could think of it as a seventh one, but it doesn't really count. It has permeable capillaries, which can allow, aspects of the brain to interact more directly with the bloodstream, but it doesn't actually have like neural tissue and neurons. So arguably, it doesn't count.